I like the example of the Ford Pinto in the 1970s. Maybe you're familiar with this idea, but they engineers discovered that there was a fatal design flaw in the Ford Pinto. That if it got rear-ended at speeds like even as little as like 15 miles an hour, the way the bumper was positioned, it
It
could cause
explode or
the
something?
tank to explode. And
It's crazy.
they really did a cost-benefit analysis as a company. They decided that it would be more cost-effective to pay out settlements from accidents than to recall the vehicle. That's enmity. That's I
Then
will
yes.
pursue my own flourishing no matter what, right?
Yes.
And, you know, to take examples closer to home, if you read these accounts of whistleblowers in these big social media or tech companies, these ideas that we know products we're creating are harmful and we just press forward anyway.
Well, hey there, folks. Welcome to another episode of the Faith Roundtable. My name is Josh Burtram. I'm your host here, of course, and I'm your co-host on the Faithful Politics podcast. I'm the faithful co-host there, and it happens right here on this same channel. So make sure you like, subscribe, do all that stuff that hacks the algorithm. Also, I'm the lead pastor at River City Underground. So if you're ever in the Richmond, Virginia area, come check us out. We meet Saturday nights. Check us out at rivercityunderground.com or go look at our website at faithfulpolitics.com. So it's so great, though. I am super excited in this episode of the Faith Roundtable, which to explore the idea of work. And here on the Faith Roundtable, we explore big questions at the edge of Christianity and culture. And I'm super excited to be joined by two seasoned theologians and pastors who co-authored the book Worth Doing, Fallenness, Finitude, and Work in the Real World. David Buschart is Professor Emeritus of Theology and Historical Studies at Denver Seminary. His work focuses on theology, history, Protestant traditions, and the church's life across time. And then Ryan Tafilowski is Chair of Theology and Assistant Professor of Theology at Denver Seminary. He's also a pastor, and works at the intersection of theology and the daily realities of work and discipleship. And gentlemen, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here to talk with me about your book and work. Thank you.
Good to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. I really want to think through today the problem you're trying to solve, right? In faith and work and in these conversations. You also have a core framework, this finitude and fallenness, which I think is important. And then what this actually changes for ordinary work. And again, I'll guide you through this, just kind of setting the framework for us. And then people in jobs like that they didn't choose, they don't love. And how do we work through this? And even like practices like, what does this look like on Tuesday at 2:17 p.m. or maybe in my case, 4:08 p.m. right now? What does this look like? So maybe before we dig into the argument in more depth, what's the pastoral moment for each of you guys that made you realize, man, we need a different theology of work. The one we have isn't working?
Well, let me start, and then Ryan can follow up and correct what I say. So you've asked a good starting question, because our book, there is a rather specific context out of which the book comes, or to say there's a specific context into which we are hoping to speak, and that is the faith and work movement and the theology of work within that, particularly over the last, let's say, 30 years or so. And just to say, first of all, that there is something that's called the faith and work movement. There are a lot of Christians doing a lot of good work, no pun intended.
Yes,
a
absolutely.
lot of good work to help Christians think and act well in terms of work. And we have been both in our own ways participants in that arena for quite some time. And we're not seeking to overturn what's been done there. We are seeking from the inside, if I can put it that way, to provide some what I'll call recalibration of the way the theology of work is done. And I won't say any more now. That'll be part of what we're talking about. But just to say, part of the context, or one of the context of the book, is the faith and work movement of the last couple of decades.
That makes a lot of sense. Ryan, is there anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I think I'd only add the nut that one of the nuts we're trying to crack in the book, I think. And I think the faith and work movement broadly, I think, is trying to crack right now, trying to grapple with, is how do we broaden the tent to include more kinds of workers, right? Faith and work literature and conferences and podcasts. There's amazing work being done, but time and again, you're seeing it's white collar workers or the creative class evangelicals, one scholar calls them. And there's no shortage of literature on that. And, you know, I worked for a number of years at a really great organization called the Denver Institute for Faith and Work, who I think, for my money, are doing some of the best work in this space anywhere in the country. They're doing amazing work. But one of the things that kept coming up in our staff meetings is, well, how do we get more people from more industries at our events? And one idea that sort of germinated there, and we're taking a crack at it in the book anyway, is maybe we need multiple theologies of work and not just one. To speak to a broader range of workers. And the one that's predominantly on offer in these spaces just isn't really resonating. And I had a moment as a pastor that really drove this home. So I serve as a pastor.
Tell.
Yeah, I serve as a pastor to a smallish congregation in the Littleton suburbs. We've got a good mix of people, professionals, people working in the knowledge economy, people working in the trades, blue collar workers. And I was in this men's Bible study for many, many years that met on Friday mornings. And I was the youngest member typically. And there was all these guys who had come home from Vietnam. And that was an extremely turbulent time. A lot of them had young families and they just took whatever job they could get. And there was a guy in my Bible study, a guy named Rich, who's gone to be with the Lord a couple of years ago, wonderful man, who drove for Pepsi for 40 something years. Yeah. Incredible. Right. And
it really is incredible.
It is. Took a lot of pride in his work, and his job was to deliver to this pretty remote mountain town in Colorado. So he'd pick up the Pepsi in the plant in Denver and drive up into the mountains and drop it off. And I had been reading a lot of faith and work literature, and I was getting really excited about eschatology and this idea of the New Jerusalem and how all of our redeemed work is going to end up finding a place in God's future. And I think I said something like, Rich, tell me what makes you passionate about your work or something like that. And he looked at me in a way that was patient, but also like, what kind of question is that? Like, what a stupid question.
Like the very fact that you asked that question, I idea what you're talking
about. Yeah. So I had this moment talking to Rich where I was like, well, maybe all this Genesis 1 and 2 and all this Revelation 21 stuff isn't going to land here. And you'll see that come through in the book too.
I absolutely love that. I mean, I completely resonate with that story and with that idea. You know, like I planted a church in Richmond, Virginia, like I mentioned, and I wanted it to be a house church, and I was going to people, and I was like, you gotta have mission, like you gotta I was just trying to ignite them, and they're just like, man, I just really want to pay my mortgage, and they're like really just like they're just trying to get to a job they don't like, and it's like, and it's not that obviously you can find joy. And we'll get into this right within your argument, but it definitely is a reality that kind of slaps you in the face when you're young and ambitious and maybe a little naive. And yet, we want to kind of figure out how to do it without losing, right, our hope or ambition, obviously. And so if you guys I would love to hear from each. And Dave, is there something you wanted to add there?
Well, I was just going to say, again, from within the kind of the faith and work, the theology of work arena, just the word for what we were talking about there is what's called the instrumental view of work, or the instrumental value of work. And in other words, this fellow that Ryan knew, this was honest work. He did it conscientiously, and that work put a roof over the family's head, put food on the table, put clothes on the back, and
gave a tithe to a church.
I'm sure he did. He probably paid part of Ryan's salary.
Probably.
And I think one of the things we think, and it's not just us, but one of the things that's been an unintended consequence in the faith and work movement of trying to cast this very inspiring, good vision of work has been, we've kind of jumped over and kind of looked at the idea of instrumental work. And that's kind of ho-hum. That's kind of mundane. That's not very inspiring or exciting when, in fact, it's absolutely fundamental, right?
It is.
That this is, in echoing Paul, this is providing for his household. And one of the things we should do is to acknowledge that and affirm it and celebrate it.
Yes.
That's not the only thing we affirm and celebrate, but this instrumental value of work has been, I think, an unintended consequence. Neglecting that or overlooking it or minimizing it has just been if you will, an unintended byproduct of some otherwise really well-motivated theology of work.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. You're trying to find a way, to take the transcendent and bring it to people in a way that they can understand, and that's exciting. So sometimes I think in our humanity we want to go towards those things that are more shiny, more exciting, more, inspiring, quote unquote, because we maybe don't trust in the slower process, don't trust in the faithfulness, over time. And I think that's why your book is really important, and even in our time. And and if you were to put it like in one sentence, obviously it's a couple sentences, but if you were to try to summarize, what's the thesis of the book? What's your claim that you want people to take away? And then you kind of unpack that. What would you say? Either of you could start, but I'd love to hear from both of you on this one.
So yeah, as you mentioned earlier, the central thesis of the book is organized around this basic framework of finitude and fallenness. I'll let Dave speak to finitude. He did most of the work on that concept in the book. I'll speak a little bit to fallenness. One of the things we're trying to contend in the book is that if a theology of work is going to be any use in the real world, it doesn't help anyone to understate the impact of sin on work. Not just our individual jobs, but industries, economies, right? These are really complicated and really difficult and potentially intractable problems, right? So I think a lot of Christians are trying to figure out how they're supposed to work faithfully on a team where they may not agree with everything that's happening, or in an industry where they're not so sure that everything they're doing is a net positive, within an economy that's actually in some ways totally inscrutable, that we're not even sure what impact our work has, right?
It's like we're not really taking our fallenness very seriously in terms of our work.
I think there's a lot of good faith and work thinking on sin, but I think that there's also a lot that just sort of tends to gloss it over. Like, yeah, it is true that there are thorns and thistles now, but we've got this vision of Eden and we've got this vision in the New Jerusalem, and we should just work to realize it. And I'll speak for myself. I'm a little suspicious about to what degree we can realize those visions under the conditions that we have to work. Now, that's not the same thing as saying that all work is irredeemably fallen and there's no hope for redemptive or redeeming work. Of course not. It's just we need to start with where we are, not where we were and where we hope we'll be. And where we are is east of Eden. So that's the fallen.
Yeah. Can I speak on that for just a second, David, before you jump in?
Please.
I became somewhat of a history buff in the last, essentially, I've always liked history, but in the last 6 years, because of this podcast and just meeting all these experts. And I'm like, I have no idea what I'm talking about. So I better start studying so I have some kind of clue so I can really, intelligently converse with some of these people that I've had on, including distinguished people such as yourselves. And I mean that with all seriousness. So while doing this, one of the things that I noticed is that I wasn't very good at thinking through how hard this world really was for most of history and how brutal this world was. And I hear that said a lot. And ancient historians, people, even colonial times, I'm listening to lectures on colonial times, and just the brutality of even the Puritans and the Pilgrims and people that we wouldn't imagine. We have this vision in our mind that we couldn't see doing some of the horrific things that they did. And there was so much bleakness and it was so difficult, the death rate in Jamestown. And you just there's something about that world that I think we've lost in our Western bubble. There's still places in the world that are very much like that. Right. And I don't want to discount that. Right. I'm thinking in my context, I'm very disconnected from those kinds of effects of the fall. And so maybe like that starvation, the kinds of effects that are like, you know what I'm saying? Like it's so obvious that this world is terrible. I'm able to live in a nice room with a decent house. And well, I mean, world standards, it's probably a mansion, right? And then I have air conditioning and it's warm inside when it's cold out there, and it's cold inside when it's hot out there. And it's like,
Yeah.
it's hard for me to think about the fallenness sometimes, except in terms of like, I'm bored, or I wish that I was more existentially fulfilled, or whatever it is. And yet the fallenness is something like that sense of fallenness is really part of what made the gospel so good, wasn't it? Such good news that Jesus came to the marginalized and the poor. Sorry, go ahead, David.
Yeah. Well, first of all, just thanks for sharing that very personal kind of experience. And both of us, I think I can speak for Ryan, saying, what a great thing to actually read about history. And
Yes.
in this era of multiculturalism and diversity, it needs to include, not limited to, looking back historically, both
Absolutely.
world history and the history of Christianity as well. So
Absolutely.
just affirm that. Going back
finitude, you would,
well,
anything you'd want to say about fallenness, and then whatever you'd want to say about finitude.
Well, I'm gonna incorporate the phrase that Ryan used, and he's the one that really brought it to the book, from John Steinbeck in many ways. If I had to try to do this in a single sentence, it would be that we want to point the way for a theology of work that more realistically reflects work in accord with God's designs, creation designs, as it is east of Eden. So the key part there is in accord with God's creation design, as that is experienced and as it exists east of Eden.
Because we can't experience it west of Eden. And explain the metaphor for those who might listen and not understand.
So first of all, it's really fundamental to recognize God as creator, that this world, that who we are as human beings, those are all God's doing. That's God's design. That's God's work. And he, as we know, he called it good, indeed very good, right? But the basic nature and character of human being is God's design. The basic realities of the world as we experience it, the created world, are God's design, God's doing. And work needs to be done in accord with that. To adapt a phrase, some people will use the phrase maybe in accord with the grain of the universe. This is the way things are made. And if you run your hand in accord with the grain, you're not going to get slivers. If you run your hand against the grain, you're going to get slivers. It's the same wood, right? So that's, and some of that's the finitude dimension. So part of the reality of finitude is that it is part of God's creation design. We may not always understand it or like our limits.
Things end and that we have limits.
Things end. We have limits. We're finite creatures. That's God's doing by design. The east of Eden part is hearkening back to the Genesis account of the fall, the Garden of Eden, that what was one of the consequences of the fall. God expelled Adam and Eve from the garden. He didn't destroy the garden.
Yes.
He didn't annihilate Adam and Eve, but he did relocate them. And then he also did some other things that changed the complexion in many ways of the created reality. So it's really important to recognize that God, what he didn't do in Eden, he could have, when Eden unfolded and the story with Adam and Eve unfolded, he could have said, you know what, this has not worked out the way I was hoping. And I think I'm just going to wipe the slate clean and start from scratch. He didn't do that. And that's very significant, because what he did was he kept what he had made, recognized how broken it was, and both brought consequences and offered redemption with full in what he made. And that's the reality of east of Eden. It's an imperfect world. It's not the way Eden was. And whatever the vision of the future is, we're not there yet. And that's...
I mean, it's So I'm really curious about this, David, and I know also love to get your thoughts on finitude, Ryan, because I'm thinking about like I'd love to hear you define it theologically, even maybe a little bit more. And I guess like helping me and the audience understand how is it that something that feels so bad can be a good thing rather than a defect, right? So and I'm just imagining someone in the audience thinking and feeling, yeah, I mean, I know that that is reality, and so maybe I just need to accept it, but do I accept it as good? Or am I getting that wrong? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Ryan, you want to make a run?
I would only say you're talking about finitude specifically.
Yeah, and you could bring it over into fallenness as well.
Yeah, so one of the things we try to distinguish in the book is that finitude is a genuine good of creation, and it remains a genuine good. Now, the fall, I think,
Even before the fall.
yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah, that humans are
We
finite.
are our limitations are not post fall. That's not something given to us as a consequence of disobedience or something like that.
That's right. And you get this a little bit in faith and work literature, not so much, but you do get it in lots of sort of secular work literature, business literature,
Interesting.
that your limits are something to be overcome, and you need to maximize your efficiency and overcome your limits. And
Yes.
I think this has tremendous implications for the way that we think about AI and work, for example, and we could talk about
Yes.
that. But I think when you start from a faulty understanding of what a human being is, you're going to get these really toxic work mythologies that are going to ask you to resist your finitude or try to transcend it. And that's a recipe for burnout or disappointment or boredom or despair or overwork or any number of harms. And so I think there's something really healthy about just recognizing that you're a creature and work is one aspect of your creatureliness, but your
Yes.
value is not located there. It's one expression by which you could live out your calling before God, but it's not the only thing about you. It's not the most important thing. And if we ask it to do too much, it's going to let us down and it's going to hurt people too. So finitude's your friend. I'd like for us to get to a theology of work in which we start there.
It's like finitude is your friend, but why are we so resistant to accepting it? It's like I'm so resistant to accepting my limits.
Yeah.
Like truly I
Well,
am.
I mean, for starters, this is one angle of perception on what happened in the garden.
Right.
There were limits, and Adam and Eve transgressed those limits. So the human propensity or choice to transcend, and I don't use this adjective all the time, but what we're talking about here is creation, what we can call creational finitude. When we talk about finitude being a good part of a creature, we're not talking about finitude where human evil has distorted things, right? So if there's a population of people in a country, and because of a dictator's military and political desires, they withhold food from that region, right? That's not, in the case of creational finitude, that's not the kind of limit we're talking.
That's not a good, yes.
Right. We're talking about the kind of limits that come with being a creature. So
dimension, like space, right?
Space and time, right? This may get played maybe one time after we record it, but however many.
No, it'll be played more.
We're recording this right now, and right now, the three of us can't be anyplace else. We are incapable of being anyplace else. We're here, right? And when we're done with this recording, 60 minutes will have passed, not more than that, not less than that, and we will have had no control over it.
Yes.
60 minutes has passed. And so we live, God made us within this space-time reality. And one of the,
even
Ryan
our bodies,
kind of alluded to it, that we have, especially with recent technology, we've tried to act as though we're not limited by space and time.
Yes.
But we are all human. And this is also where, by taking finitude and fallenness and Ryan's description of wanting faith theology work that applies to more people, the fact is everybody's constrained by the same reality of time. Whether you're Tom Brady or a hotel cleaner, you have 7 days a week and 24 hours in each day. That's it. Now, Brady has more what we call agency to manage within that time, but he can't add time to his week that the hotel person doesn't have. And the same is
No.
true for space.
But it does complicate the whole concept of time management as kind of,
Yeah.
in some ways, a very silly construct. I mean, a human doesn't manage time any more than we manage gravity, right? Time happens whether we
So
are
it's
interested or not.
managing behavior and attention
Yes,
in time.
yes.
That's right.
I'd
And
say
we
to
have to do
anybody
that,
who, in seeking to work on the so-called work-life balance, when they're approached about learning about time management, just a slight recalibration of how you think about it, it's really work management. It's
Energy management,
managing your
work
work
management.
and the rest of your life within the realities of what time is.
So what does enough mean? Like when someone says, I have enough in my life, what I know that that's a subjective thing, but how does enough become like, hey, this is a virtue rather than just like this is a resignation into, I can't do anymore. I guess this is enough. Like it's like how do we move from this is enough to I guess this is enough?
That's good.
Or no, the other way. I guess this is enough to this is enough.
This is a question I've been thinking about a lot. As it happens, after writing the book, David and I are now co-teaching a course at Denver Seminary on the theology of work, which has been really fun.
Awesome.
And trying to think hard about sort of how do we make concrete a theology of work that recognizes this finitude. And you may have seen in the book, we draw extensively on Ecclesiastes, which for my money, I think has the sort of most
best.
hopeful vision of
Yes,
theology
yes.
of work anywhere in the canon, even though on your first read through, it might seem horribly depressing. And
Yes.
part of what I'm learning about this book as I read more and more about it, and I prepare for this class, and I've started to look at some of these texts a bit closer, is this word that is used over and over again in Ecclesiastes, this word lot, right? I think we're completely misreading it in American English because of the way that it functions in our colloquialisms. We might say, well, that's just my lot in life, meaning like
Right.
that's how things fell and this is what I get. When actually the way that Kohelet is using that word, I'm convinced anyway, is like an allotment, like a plot, like God giving you
This is your
a space
inheritance.
and saying,
This is yours.
that's right. And it's the same Hebrew word that is often translated inheritance or portion or share. It's actually even the same word for like booty
good.
or a prize of war, something you take from a victory.
Right.
And Kohelet can say, hey, there's nothing better for you than to eat and drink and to work because that's your lot. And he doesn't mean it in the sort of wah, like this is what you got.
Like almost like it's almost like the gambling
That's right.
analogy that we have. This is the hand you were dealt.
That's
right. Just this, as opposed to this was a gift that was bestowed.
Yeah, and it's much more this, that God has given you this little space. You have responsibility for it. You have to cultivate it, right? It's like, think of it as an unplanted plot, right? If you want to use an agricultural metaphor. And once you recognize that, like, you actually need limits for that to be meaningful, because if you try to sort of plant everywhere, you'll expend all your energies. You won't be able to focus on what you have. But if you think of your lot as one scholar translates it, I love this translation, a small good thing. And if you could think of your work as a small good thing that you're supposed to cultivate, that puts limits around it so that it won't encroach on other parts of your life, which are as meaningful or more meaningful. And it gives you some focus on what you actually have a responsibility to cultivate. And I think when I think about young folks in my church graduating college, maybe it would be helpful to think, man, what's my lot? Rather than what are my limitless possibilities? And then you become paralyzed in the face of it.
I really, really, really like that. David, I'd love to hear your thoughts, and then Ryan on this as well. What's the spiritual danger of denying our limits, our finitude? What's the danger of that? Why should we really, really avoid that?
Well, in kind of theological principle, the danger or the wrongness of it is a refusal to accept our creaturehood. We are creatures, and we are not God. God is not us. We are creatures, and that as creatures, we have received life and existence and our being as a gift from God. This isn't something that we have manufactured, that we've made. We didn't bring ourselves into the world. And so fundamental to it's not the total, if you will, address, but there really has to be a grounding in a recognition. My life is not my own. I have been given this. This is a gift from God. And that means I think about my life and my work in accord with what God has given, which is creaturehood, which is not bad. He pronounced it good. It's been damaged, right? And we're alienated apart from Christ, apart from the work of God and redemption. But so the starting point, I'm increasingly, in our cultural context, I'm increasingly convinced that, and I've never been a creation doctrine warrior. That hasn't been part of my portfolio. But in our cultural context, I'm increasingly convinced that theologically speaking, and I don't expect non-Christians to hold Christian beliefs, but I think that Christians have to have a strong view of God as creator and us as creatures. And if that isn't foundational, I think you can't help but end up with distorted views of what it means to be human.
Yes.
And then, translates into, among other things, what it means to faithfully work.
Yeah, it's like a distortion, because what are you doing when you treat yourself as if you don't have limits? You're treating yourself as if you're essentially committing a category error. You're not seeing reality as it is. So you're thinking that you're something that you're not, which creates a distortion, because essentially whatever it is you're designed to do, those limits, if you push them, it'll end up damaging whatever apparatus or mechanisms or whatever you have, instruments for whatever instruments you have for accomplishing those will become damaged, whether that's mental, spiritual, physical, right? We don't know what the mechanism of action is, right, for the spiritual issues, but we know enough about the physical, I guess, to say that we know it exists, right? That connection there, because we're so embodied. It would seem to me, at least.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys have thoughts on that.
I
would love to move into fallenness, but go ahead.
Well, I love what you said there, and I'll hazard a clumsy metaphor. Please understand, I'm not likening humans to machines. God knows there's enough of that happening in our discourse right now.
Right.
But like a thing can't perform its function if it's used out of accordance with what it's designed to do.
Yeah,
and a human can't flourish if you don't recognize what you are, right? Like, so
that's true.
If you have, I don't know, if you drive a truck that takes diesel and you come to the gas station and they don't have diesel and you're like, 85's probably fine, or I'll just put some washer fluid in there, or I'll go get a bunch of Mountain Dew,
right,
and I'll put that in there. It's all liquid, right? Well, obviously, right. Like, the thing won't work if you're not fueling it correctly.
Yes,
and if you don't recognize what you are, you're going to try to fuel yourself with things that are going to make the mechanism break, right?
Yes,
and we're seeing that all over the place, I think.
Yes, I think we are. Go ahead, David.
Well, I was just going to say, because I want you to go on to your next line of inquiry, but just to say quickly, I think we have to be really alert to our cultural context and the messages that are in our culture, pervasive, not occasional, but pervasive. And one of the pervasive messages in our culture is, the Disney view of that we tell kids, you can be whatever you want to be. You can do whatever you want to do.
Yes.
And we just came off of the Olympics and watched these people do absolutely remarkable things that reflect decades of dedication and work. But when a 40-year-old Olympian says, I did this to show my children or whoever, that you can do anything you set your mind to. Now, I'm going to sound like a real curmudgeon here who's really advocating that we all be mediocre.
Don't be a curmudgeon, David.
But the fact is, those Olympic athletes won't be doing what they're doing when they're 60. It ain't going to happen, right?
No.
There are limits, but we've got all these messages from Disney to the corporate world to the sports arena that talk for motivational reasons as if there's no limit we can't overcome. And that's just, it's
It's
not that it's
patently false,
Christian,
right?
it's wrong. It's not the real world.
Well, so I've actually been, this is an actual thought I had maybe even yesterday or the day before. And maybe because this interview was coming up, but I was thinking about how, man, I can complain about my life, and yet I know without a shadow of a doubt that I have it good, like comparatively speaking, again, just even thinking about like 1600s, even the rich in 1600s, right? Not to make light of anyone's plight, of the poor, certainly of those times, but even like we have it better. Like like an average American probably has it better than them. Not all of them, but maybe on average, just because of the technology and things we have. And then all like being in America, having the things that I have, and having a body that is not sick right now, and not all these different things, right? That you can really take for granted. And be so upset by how life is so difficult and this is so hard, and why can't, and yet why not be thankful for the fact that I have a brain and a fully capable body and energy, and I can work on a solution to the problem instead of complaining that it hasn't been handed to me, right? So, something along those lines. It's like it's so important to be reminded not only of my limited nature. This is just so good, my limited nature, because, man, if I forget that, I am going to absolutely destroy myself and those around me, right? It never just ends with me. It's never just me. It's always spills over to my kids and my wife and the people in my church and my friends and all that, right? But not only that, but if I disregard just the frustration that's built in, right, to our just nature, the frustration. I think this is part of the fallenness, right, concept that you guys talk about, but you're very concrete about it, and you talk about. I just want to make sure I'm going to read these to make sure I have them right. Enmity, absurdity, tragedy. And so what is it like? What are those three lenses of enmity, absurdity, and tragedy? Yeah. And how do they kind of make fallenness what it is?
Yeah. Happy to speak to that. Loved what you said there. As you were speaking, I was thinking of that great line in First Peter when he says, brothers and sisters, when you suffer, don't look around like some strange thing is happening to you. I love that line.
Yes.
And I think in our context, we tend to think of suffering that way. Like, this isn't supposed to happen. I live in America in the 21st century. Don't we have a technology? Isn't there an app for this? Right? Why?
Yes.
Why is this happening? Peter's counsels good advice. Like, it's in your nature to be beset by pressures and trials that you're not equal to. Why are you surprised? Yeah, so that's helpful. Love that. The enmity, absurdity, tragedy taxonomy. It was a way to try to create a kind of continuum by which we might understand both the way that we commit sin and the way that sin happens to us, if I can put it like that. So enmity is on this side of the spectrum. That's sinning with agency. That's sin as againstness, right? This is when we use work to damage other people and to defy God and to make a name for ourselves. Enmitous work, the againstness. On the other end, we've got tragedy. This was an attempt to kind of articulate the experience of working under conditions where you've probably got some culpable responsibility for what's happening, but then also you're kind of in a system or an industry or an economy or a structure where you couldn't have done otherwise. It's just sort of, you're trapped, right? So it's a way to say, like, yeah, you are responsible, but you're also kind of not. And then absurdity is this kind of mediating category where we argue that one of the conditions that sin creates in the world is this sort of incongruence, this illness of fit between what we expect of the world and what we get. And I think so many people who are suffering in their work, it's not acute distress, it's not enmity, and it's maybe not huge moral questions either. Like on the tragedy side, it's sort of like, man, this job is boring and I thought it would be better than this.
It's just absurd that I'm still in this.
Yeah, right? Or like, or I don't know, like I've got some young professionals in my ministry context who have really succeeded. They have good jobs and now they've made it. They bought a house in the suburbs and they've got their 2.5 kids and they're paying into their okay. And they're like, well, all right. Like, was that sort of
That's
it?
it.
Yeah. I mean, that's an expression of absurdity too, right? And this is a theme you see running throughout the whole book of Ecclesiastes, where he has these magnificent accomplishments and it's just sort of hollow for him. Now he's going to find his way through that. I think the Christian faith can help with that.
Absolutely.
That gap between expectation and reality is what we're trying to capture with the language of absurdity.
That makes sense. So when we're thinking about enmity, how does that show up at work? How do we see the sin of enmity show up at the job? What does that look like?
Sure. I mean, you could take an extreme example. You could pick your social media company, or you could choose. I like the example of the Ford Pinto in the 1970s. Maybe you're familiar with this idea, but they engineers discovered that there was a fatal design flaw in the Ford Pinto. That if it got rear-ended at speeds like even as little as like 15 miles an hour, the way the bumper was positioned, it could cause
explode or
the
something.
tank to explode. And
It's crazy.
they really did a cost benefit analysis as a company. They decided that it would be more cost effective to pay out settlements from accidents than to recall the vehicle. That's enmity. I will pursue my own flourishing no matter what. Right.
Yes.
And, to take examples closer to home, if you read these accounts of whistleblowers in these big social media or tech companies, these ideas that we know products we're creating are harmful and we just press forward anyway. I think on a smaller scale that probably more people can relate to, right? There's this journalist, Derek Thompson, who uses this language of workism. Our problem isn't workaholism anymore. It's workism. It's looking to work to fulfill all of our needs and become the source of transcendence and identity, that we're just trying to make a name for ourselves through work. I think idolatrous work could be enmity work. So, there's two examples, one more extreme, one probably closer to home.
Yeah. David, how do you think absurdity shows up in your life, in our lives?
How do I think that what shows up? I'm sorry?
Absurdity.
Absurdity.
How does that aspect of the fallenness, what does that do? How does that show up in us?
Well, I hesitate to appeal to finitude because you'll think that's the only category we think through, or that I think through.
No, please do.
The fact
it's part
is,
of the argument.
There are limits to our knowledge, to our understanding, to our insights, and again, I understand. I think I understand and genuinely empathize with people when we ask why questions, but it's very interesting in Scripture. We are very seldom, I don't know that we're ever called upon to understand why certain things happen. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't make it easy.
You sound like my mother, David. I think I've heard her say that exact phrase to me. Well, she must be a very smart woman.
Maybe your mother's a wise woman.
I think she
is.
A
wise. But I won't speak for Ryan here, but, I've spent, give or take, 40 years studying theology. Doesn't make me better than anybody. I'm just saying, in that context,
that's your context.
There are all kinds of things that I don't understand, that I don't have answers to yet. Now, you could chalk that up to being stupid or slow, all of which is true, but it's kind of taught me one of the things, and I think people don't maybe recognize this about scholars, many scholars, you just recognize how much you don't know. And that
it's maddening.
If God grants me another 20, 30 years, and I'm not anticipating that much, I would still have things that I don't fully understand.
Yes.
That's an example. So I just give that as an example of recognizing my limits. And by the way, but now people are going to say, oh, well, so you're not curious about things. You're not pressing ahead, stretching yourself. I can't prove it, but I would say, ask my family who sees me in my private moments, whether I kind of go home and say, well, I'm shutting down for the day. I'm not going to have another thought. I'm not going to read a book. I'm not going to probe a question. No, I do that still, but I do it with a recognition of creaturehood, that my knowledge will always be of a creaturely sort.
I mean, I think that is really, really, really wise to approach life in that way, because it just seems to me to be in accordance with reality. And the more we can be in accordance with reality, I'm really bad at being in accordance with reality. I hate reality. I want it to be different all the time. I want to be 20 again. I want to be, all these things.
I want to be 50 again.
I hear you. And so it's like all these things, right? Yeah. And of course, that's what I'm going to say. I'm like, I want to be 50 again. And one day I am going to say that. So I should be thankful for being 40. Thank you, David. I should be. And so, like, thinking about finitude and fallenness, right? Understanding them, and I love how we've explored them. What does this do to work? How does faithfulness, how does this understanding transform faithfulness when we're approaching our work, especially focusing in on someone who is not fulfilled in their job right now?
One thing that I would hope for is that it would put work in proper perspective as something that is good, meaningful, a gift from God, really powerful, has the potential to create a lot of flourishing, but only one aspect of creatureliness, right? And I hope that if we can put it in right perspective, it can take some of the pressure off, right? We talk a little bit in the book about how there's some, I think, some pretty harmful ideologies out there that, like, you have to do what you love or else you're wasting your life, or you are what you do. And I think this is changing, has changed really dramatically, and not for the better in the last generation or so. I read a really interesting article in which this sociologist was saying he had traced the way that marketing materials, recruiting materials had changed in the last two generations, call it. It used to be, come work at this company, we've got competitive pay, we've got solid benefits, decent hours, and you work with nice folks. And now that's not nearly good enough. And all these recruiting materials, it's like not just those material things, but also like this is going to fulfill your passion, or it's going to change the world somehow, or you got to work in a place that perfectly aligns with your values. And I just don't buy it. And I don't think that's the Bible's vision for work. I don't think that's how most Christians have thought about work historically. And I think it's actually a lot more freeing to say work can be a small good thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another layer we've occasionally touched on, kind of the contextual, the way the context influences our perceptions and our evaluations. You talked about that quite a bit in some of your reflections. I think we have to recognize that this idea of challenging people to do what they love or find their passion or identify where your heart intersects what God's doing in the world.
Yeah.
And I think I'm not totally opposed to those kinds of visions being cast, so long as it's recognized they aren't normative and they simply aren't going to happen for everyone. In other words, we encourage, I should say, in some cases, we encourage discontent if we cast a vision of work that simply is not in accord with God's designs living in the reality east of Eden. And when we, in that context, speak about work in exaggerated ways, I'm not saying we don't have to be negative, but that we have a properly positive view of work. When we don't do that and we exaggerate it and then take those exaggerations and create the expectation, this is what everybody should be seeking. That's really reflective of, and here's the contextual piece, if I can put it this way, the privilege, and privilege isn't a bad word. I am privileged. I don't apologize for all that, but I do need to be aware I'm privileged. I was able to go to college, right? I was able to go to college without bankrupting my parents. And then I was able to make other choices. Well, I don't apologize for those, but I do recognize not everybody has those opportunities, right?
Yes.
And so I think having a tempered view of an awareness of the kind of opportunities some of us have, whereas other people don't have those opportunities. And we should work to address those conditions, but certainly don't pour gas on it by talking as if they ought to be doing something that, frankly, they simply aren't in a position to do.
I mean, this is really good for me because I've often, I think a lot of pastors struggle with this because you really want to get your people rallied around a vision and a mission, and you want to get them excited and activated and going. And so you want to give them, and And so you want to try to, like, I don't know, that's been my experience, to try to do that. Now, sometimes it's people don't really care about that as much as maybe getting them activated just in certain ways. And I guess we all have a vision of how we want people to be activated as a pastor. Like, right? We all kind of have a vision of that. And it's like, for me, I wanted to get people, like, all of them, like, ignited for their neighborhood, reaching the lost with the gospel. And I got to be honest, I don't know if it was me, if it was my lack of obedience, if it was depression, if it was all the issues that I faced. I don't know what it was, but that didn't work in my context. People didn't do it. And I don't know why. And it's like I just end up blaming myself, but it's like I could have done differently. I could have, I guess, been a different person. I don't know. How can you? It's just so weird. But it's like I want to start seeing them in a different light. And I think that this is a really helpful concept to not see people, like, not to see it as a, like, some huge failure that people didn't, like, ignite some movement in their neighborhood, but like, hey, we, like, why don't we see the fact that I walked one of my best friends through divorce and loved him through it and cared for him, right? And all this stuff. And it's like, why can't I see that as, like, worthwhile? And why can't I see, I just, walking people through sickness in their family with with children. And, it's just like those things, and just helping people find purpose and meaning in their own jobs and their own families and their own context. Like, why isn't that good enough? And I don't know the answer to that question, because there is a sense in which, like, it feels like there should be a missionary urgency in what we're doing, but I don't know how that translates, to be honest with you. It hasn't translated for me somehow. I don't know why. It
Well,
wasn't for lack of reading.
I don't know you. I don't know you, Josh, and maybe there are things you could have done differently, and maybe a different strategy might have worked. But I mean, I also think Solomon, the preacher, would say sometimes things just happen,
Yeah.
right? The race is not always to the swift. Sometimes you put in all the work and it doesn't work out. That's that absurdity piece.
Yeah. Yeah, that definitely.
And if he ends there, then that's really depressing, but he doesn't.
Right.
There's a way through that, but I think actually there's no way but through it.
Yeah.
Dietrich Bonhoeffer has this amazing line in his book Life Together, where he says anyone who comes into the Christian community is going to experience disillusionment, and the sooner they do, the better. Because only then can they realize that God's got a vision for the church.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to make light of your experience. I mean,
No, I appreciate it.
I pastor a church, and I don't know how many times I've tried something that I really thought would work, and it just didn't. And then stuff that we thought would not work at all seemed to resonate. I don't know.
And it's just like labor intensive. And anyway, no, this is just a really good conversation. I just really appreciate it. Guys, is there a preferred vendor that you have for the book? And then how can people get involved with what you guys are doing? Give them some next steps if you have any, even at the seminary that you're at, whatever you'd like to do in terms of, like, what you want to invite people into.
I'll mention a couple of things, and Ryan can complete.
Please do.
So the book is called, the title is simply Worth Doing, and it's published by InterVarsity Academic Press, and it's available obviously from InterVarsity website, but also all the other usual vendors, Amazon and the like. Here at the seminary, at the moment, we don't have an extensive offering of specific faith and work related initiatives. Ryan and I are teaching this course, and whether I'm involved or not, I'm quite confident it won't be the last time that course is taught. Just one other thing, and then Ryan can add, and that is, in the back of the book, the last component in the book is actually an appendix that briefly describes the kind of the rise and the current landscape of the faith and work movement. And in that, we actually identify, it's not just a list, it's kind of a narrative story, but we identify a lot of organizations and places you can turn for resources, helpful resources related to the theology of work and the faith and work movement. So the final pages of the book provide quite a few resources.
Yeah, I would just add a special plug for Denver Institute for Faith and Work, who David and I have both known and worked with, and they're doing really interesting stuff in our city and across the country. And there's a bunch of faith and work initiatives all over the country doing really cool stuff. You can find more about them in the book, in the appendix, as David said. Or you should move to Denver and come to Denver Seminary, where we can take theology classes together.
There you go. I love it. Well, guys, thanks so much for jumping on. Yes, and spending some time. I really love the conversation.
Thanks for having us, Josh.
Thank you, Josh.
Absolutely. And to our viewers, thank you guys for joining us. The book is called Worth Doing, Fallenness, Finitude, and Work in the Real World. We'll link it in the show notes, and we'll link all the stuff that we've talked about in this episode. And guys, until next time, take care. God bless. And we'll see you then.